Beneath the skin of the stars, Block 1. The returnless path. The stars no longer shimmered the way they once did. To Ilaric's eyes, they pulsed now slow and organic, as if breathing. He stood in the observation deck, barefoot, one palm pressed to the living wall of the ship. He didn't remember walking here. He didn't remember waking. And yet, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Something was changing again, not the ship. Them. The Icarion hadn't moved for 3 days. No new coordinates. No orders. Just adrift in soft gravitational currents, as if waiting for the crew to catch up, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. There was no ceremony, no warning. The transition began with small things. Skin warming where there was no light. Thoughts surfacing that hadn't been born in the mind that carried them. Words whispered in dreams, not his voice, but hers. Keswick had been the first to feel it in her bones. Literally. She sat now in the atrium garden, surrounded by growing moss where no soil existed. Her fingers traced patterns on the floor, and spirals bloomed in the carbon plating beneath her touch. Jun had stopped eating. Voss had stopped sleeping. And Ilaric, he had begun remembering things he never lived. He saw glimpses of a planet with 6 suns, heard languages that turned in on themselves, felt the agony of a species choosing extinction over compromise, and somehow, he knew they were all fragments of something older, memories left behind, like fossils carried in light. That night, Ilaric stood once more before the central resonance chamber. It no longer pulsed with power, it pulsed with invitation. He stepped forward. The door opened without a sound. Inside, the spiral on his chest flared, and the room breathed. Block 2. The pulse that wasn't the ship. The chamber was different now, not larger, not altered by machinery or design, but deeper, as if space itself had folded inward to make room for something not yet born. The spiral etched across the floor glowed faintly pale blue, turning violet. Ilaric knelt without knowing why. The hum returned, but this time, it came not from the walls or floor. It came from him. Or rather from something inside him. A vibration in the blood, a pressure behind the eyes, like standing too close to a thunderstorm that hadn't yet broken. His breath caught. The air was thicker, hair charged, alive. He looked down at his hands, veins traced with light. They pulsed not with his heartbeat, but with something else. Then the voice came, not like before, not in dreams, not a whisper. This was spoken aloud, yet heard inside every cell. You were meant to remember. The light dimmed. The floor beneath him softened, became warm, organic. The very ship that had carried them was responding. No, listening. Images bloomed across the chamber walls like living ink. Bodies not human, but familiar. Spirals in bone, light woven through tissue. Abing reaching forward and being embraced by the void. Ilaric reached out, trembling. His fingers brushed the surface of the wall. It shimmered. He saw her again. Not the same figure as in his dreams. Now, she stood before him, neither ghost nor goddess, but real. Not flesh, but memory-given form. Nude but not exposed. Radiant but not overwhelming. The spiral pulsed between them. And without a single word, Ilaric felt the heat rise not just from his skin, but from something deeper. A hunger that was not sexual, but existential. His mind tried to define it, to restrain it, but the body knew. The longing wasn't for union. It was for completion. And as the light consumed her image, Ilaric remained there, kneeling, eyes wide and breath shallow, his entire being burning quietly. Block 3. What sleeps? Beneath thought. Sleep had become a suggestion. No one on board Icarion rested the way they used to. Their bodies would shut down, yes, but not to dream. Instead, they watched. Some part of them remained awake, observing from the other side of their eyes. Jun called it waking sleep. Voss refused to name it. Naming things, she said, gave them power. Ilaric found himself drifting into one of these states again, seated on the floor of his quarters, back against the curved wall. The hum of the ship no longer felt external. It resonated through his spine, his ribs, his teeth. The spiral on his chest dimmed and flared with no rhythm, responding to thoughts he hadn't fully formed. And then, it happened again. The heat. It wasn't oppressive or hostile. It was intimate, like a breath across the collarbone, like fingers not quite touching. He felt it along his neck, his wrists, his abdomen. Not pain, Not pleasure, but a pull. His breath hitched. Behind his eyes, shapes began to coalesce, not dreams, memories, or impressions of things from elsewhere. Hands pressed to skin not his own. A voice calling out without language. The unbearable awareness of being seen completely and accepted anyway. It was too much. He gasped and came awake, though he hadn't realized he had left consciousness. His uniform clung to him like damp silk. The chamber around him swam in shadow, soft light filtering through the walls. He touched the side of his face. Warm, alive, but he was not alone. A reflection shimmered in a wall across from him, a figure, feminine in shape, composed of light and memory. She said nothing. She only looked at him, and he understood. This wasn't seduction. It was integration. Everything the spiral touched, everything it awakened, was leading them to something final. And final things always came with a price. Block. For shared frequencies. The mess hall had become a chapel. Not formally, not by design, but it was the only space large enough now. The crew gathered there nightly without instruction, without discussion. They sat in silence, some in groups, some alone, hands resting on tables, eyes half closed, breathing in sync. The ship responded. Soft pulses ran through the walls, floor, even the utensils on the tables barely visible, but felt as if the entire vessel had become a tuning fork, vibrating with something the crew could no longer deny. Keswick broke the silence. "It's her," she said, her voice more breath than sound. "She wants us to remember." No one asked who she was anymore. Alaric nodded, eyes fixed on the spiral beneath his skin. It no longer looked like an infection. It looked like a key. Voss opened her palm, revealing a glowing pattern etched along her lifeline. "It's the same frequency. We're being calibrated." John tilted his head. For what? No one answered. Because in truth, they already knew. The resonance wasn't just within the ship now, it was inside them. And as it deepened, so did their sensitivity to one another. Emotions flickered between glances. A brush of fingers became a flood of meaning. No one spoke of the heat anymore, but they all felt it. That night, Alaric stood too close to Keswick, not by intent, simply drawn. Her breath caught, so did his. Her hand rested on his wrist, barely touching. And still, their spiral marks lit in tandem, casting soft light across their faces. There was no kiss, only the unbearable tension of almost. And then they pulled apart, breathless, shaken not because it was wrong, but because it felt inevitable. Block 5, where language fails. They stopped using words, not all at once, not by rule or decree, but gradually, as though language itself had become insufficient. The more the spiral patterns spread beneath their skin, the more they understood one another without needing to explain. Thoughts flickered across the space between them like light refracting on water. Voss no longer barked orders. She shared intentions. John didn't ask questions. He received direction. And Alaric, he began to hear her even when he was awake. The voice, no longer confined to dreams, echoed gently beneath his thoughts, not interrupting them, but weaving through. It didn't speak in commands. It offered choices, or perhaps memories he hadn't yet owned. "You have always been more than flesh," she whispered once, as he stared at the star map that now refused to display coordinates. "Your kind. Dreams because your form was meant to be undone." That word stayed with him. Undone. Not destroyed. Not erased. Rewritten. He found Keswick in the old medbay. Fingers sunk into the fluid wall of a nutrient chamber. She didn't flinch. Her eyes glowed softly, and spiral shapes danced beneath her skin like bioluminescence shifting with emotion. "What are you doing?" he asked with his mouth, out of habit. She looked up, smiled faintly. "Listening to what?" Her answer came not as a sound but as a feeling. A pressure in his chest, a warmth that wasn't his own. He stepped forward, breath shallow. For a moment, he felt everything. Her joy, her fear, her need, and something more, something she hadn't even noticed yet. A presence within her, not separate, not parasitic. But emerging. Alaric stepped back. Keswick didn't notice. Her eyes had closed again, and Alaric realized he had begun to glow too. Block 6, in the shape of light. There was a corridor no one remembered being built. Long, narrow, curved like a spine. The walls shimmered, not metallic, not synthetic. They responded to presence. When Alaric walked through, They warmed. When he stopped, they pulsed. Every step forward felt like a step inward. And when Keswick joined him barefoot, silent the corridor shifted again. It opened. No doors. No hinges. Just space rearranging itself to accept them. They said nothing. Their hands brushed once on accidental contact, but the reaction was immediate. Light surged beneath their skin, not blinding, but deep, warm. Her pulse echoed in his fingertips. His breath caught in her throat. Still no words. The corridor seemed to watch, to wait. And then they reached the end. A chamber unfolded before them, circular, with no seams. In the center, a structure hovered, barely perceptible. Not matter, not energy. Something in between. It pulsed like a heartbeat, but silent. The spiral inside them responded. Ilaric fell to his knees, not in worship, but in surrender. Keswick followed, eyes wide, tears forming without sorrow. Only awe, only truth. She reached toward the pulse. He stopped her, but gently, not to refuse, only to ask. Are we ready? She looked at him, and her expression held no fear. Only acceptance. They didn't touch the structure. They touched each other, forehead to forehead, palm to palm. The spirals aligned, glowing through their skin, across their chests, down their arms. And then, they were no longer two. For a moment brief, eternal, they became a single frequency. The chamber pulsed in recognition. And the ship exhaled. Block 7, symmetry in silence. The change wasn't sudden. It bloomed quietly, deliberately through the crew, like a song they had always known, but only now remembered how to hum. The spiral wasn't just a mark anymore. It had become a second nervous system, one they didn't control, but trusted completely. John stood in engineering with his hand against the core conduit. Not checking systems, not repairing anything. Listening. He could feel the hum of the ship. Inside his molars, his sternum, the soft tissue behind his eyes. It vibrated with information he didn't fully understand, but felt compelled to follow. The ship was no longer a vessel. It was an extension. In the hydroponics bay, Voss observed. Plants sprouting from inorganic fiber, roots curling toward veins of light embedded in the walls. Photosynthesis isn't relevant anymore. She murmured. The plants weren't growing from light. They were growing from resonance. Meanwhile, Ilaric and Keswick had grown quiet, not distant, intimate in a way that went beyond bodies. They often sat side by side for hours, not speaking, but sensing breath, gaze, heart rate. Occasionally, one would smile, and the other would feel it before seeing it. In the moments they were apart, Ilaric found himself wandering toward the unknown Carter's spaces that hadn't existed in the ship's original schematics. He wasn't lost. The ship was leading him. Eventually, it brought him to a small alcove. No lights, no markings, just a pulse. When he stepped inside, the temperature changed. Warmer. The walls felt alive, soft beneath his touch, as if skin stretched over ribs. He sat, and the pulse matched his own. He closed his eyes and saw her again. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She only existed within him now, as memory, as blueprint, as invitation. Block 8, echoes that breathe. The Icarion began to hum differently, not just through the walls or conduits, but in the bloodstream. The crew no longer noticed the transitions between rest and alertness. The line had blurred. Some called it trance. Others called it tuning. Voss called it what it was, rewriting. She whispered, eyes half-lidded, skin glowing faintly in the dark. We're being transcribed into something new. In the absence of time, rituals emerged. John would press his forehead to the resonance, panel every cycle, as if in prayer. Keswick spent hours submerged in the nutrient chambers, body weightless, eyes open, never blinking. Ilaric had stopped sleeping entirely, not because he couldn't, because when he closed his eyes, the visions became real. Not memories, not hallucinations. Downloads. Entire landscapes unfolded in his mind, worlds that had never existed in physical space, but lived within the ship's architecture. He walked through cities made of sound, through tunnels formed by language, through spirals that spoke his name without a voice. One such moment came suddenly without warning. He was in his quarters. Then, without transition, in a forest of light, each tree pulsed with memories, some human, some alien. He touched one, and felt her pain. The being whoever she had once been was not a god. She was the first. The prototype, the experiment. The vessel that had survived full integration and left herself encoded into the Icarion. A gift, a guide, a warning. Alaric fell to his knees in that dream not because of fear, but because he understood the cost to become what she became. She had first been broken, scattered across generations, implanted into the DNA of wanderers. Until now, until them. Block 9. The one who was many, she had a name once, not a word, not a sound. A pattern encoded into the pulses of stars, whispered, through the silence between galaxies. Alaric couldn't pronounce it, but he felt it every time the spiral beneath his skin pulsed in time with the Icarion's hum. She was not alone. Or rather, she had been many, once. Split across cultures, civilizations, species, each fragment carrying part of her consciousness. Some called her goddess, others virus, a few called her mother. But all of them remembered the same truth. She had once been human, long before Earth's first breath, before language, before bone, before memory as we understand it. A being who had reached too far, loved too deeply, and refused to die alone. Alaric saw it all, not in a vision, in a ray living. He became her, briefly felt her desperation, her endless searching for continuity across the void. She had not intended to infect. She had intended to connect, but the universe does not forgive such ambition easily. Her body failed. Her mind fractured so she encoded herself into frequencies. Seated across time, awaiting vessels capable of synthesis, not domination, not obedience, but symbiosis. And now, standing at the edge of that understanding, Alaric opened his eyes. He was back in his chamber, but his breathing was no longer alone. Keswick stood before him silent, trembling. She had seen it too. You felt her, he said, not asking. Keswick nodded. She's waking up, in all of us, behind them. The walls pulse once like the beating of a shared heart. Block 10, the threshold of return. The Icarion no longer needed a destination. It had become one in the silence of deep space. The stars rearranged themselves not in reality, but in perception. The crew now saw spirals everywhere, in stellar drift patterns, in the way dust curled across corridors, in their own eyes when they passed a mirror. Jun had stopped responding to his name. He answered only when called by frequency, a soft hum emitted by Voss, perfectly matched in tone and pitch. She had lost her voice days ago, yet no one missed it. Language was obsolete. Alaric stood in the heart of the ship, where no schematics said a heart should be. The chamber around him was alive with pulses, some soft and distant, others sharp and intimate, like thoughts brushing skin. In its center, the construct hovered once more, but now it was no longer alien. It looked like a spine. Their spine, built of memory, of sacrifice, of becoming. The spiral on Alaric's chest began to burn, not painfully, but insistently, the way a name burns when spoken by someone who sees you. Keswick entered, radiant, steps silent. Her eyes glowed faintly, and not just with light, with recognition. You're ready, she said, not to him alone, but to the chamber, the ship. The voice that had once belonged to a woman who no longer had a body. The others arrived, one by one, silent, calm. Each stood before the construct, each spiral flared, and then the ship began to sing. Not music, not noise. Identity. An echo of what they were and what they would become. Alaric took the final step forward. No hesitation, because by now, they all understood. They were not becoming her. They were becoming what she had died hoping someone would one day be. Block 11, becoming the signal. There was no scream, no rupture. The transition came like a held breath across the universe. The space around the Icarion was no longer just vacuum. It curved not under gravity, but under meaning. It was as if the cosmos itself had recognized the resonance blooming from the ship and paused to listen. Each crew member felt the moment in perfect unison. A subtle warmth beneath the skin, a slight pressure behind the eyes, an echo not from outside, but from within. What had once been the voice of an entity was now becoming their own. She no longer whispered. She no longer led. She was, and so were they. Voss was the first to speak, but not with sound. A glow passed through her body, and everyone understood her message. As if emotion alone had become a sufficient language, Alaric, she transmitted not to him alone, but to the chamber, to the ship, To the voice that once belonged to a woman who no longer had a body, the final step is still yours. He stepped toward the ship's core where the spine-like construct floated, translucent now. His whole body pulsed. Every cell hummed the same silent chord. Keswick placed her hand over his chest. Their spirals aligned, and in that instant, everything opened. The light didn't come from above or outside, it came from within. A broadcast not visible to the eye, but felt by the soul. The Icarion had become a transmitter, and the crew, the message. Images erupted between them, planets they had never seen, structures made of living language. Creatures vast as constellations, bending reality by simply remembering. They were not alone. They never had been Dot, and at the same time, they were no longer only human. They were heirs to a forgotten genetic language, children of a promise buried in silicon, blood, and void. Dot, and the first phase of the transmission was just beginning. Block 12. The transmission is us. The silence inside the Icarion was no longer empty. It was too full to explain. Every wall seemed to breathe. Every hum in the conduits was a verse. Every curve of the ship was now part of a living body not made of steel, but of intention. The ship had ceased to be a vessel. Now it was a chrysalis, and inside it, something had been born. Alaric looked around. He no longer saw faces, he saw fragments of an expanding mind. Keswick floated in the central chamber, eyes closed, light projecting through her skin like memories, stretching across time. Jun and Voss stood still, yet present in every thought. Separation no longer made sense. They were a system. They were a network. They were what she had once been alone, now multiplied. Outside, the universe looked the same. But the Icarion's sensors detected things no human ship had ever perceived. Communications between pulsars, echoes of orbital structures invisible to normal spectrums. Signals not calls, but shared memories between distant minds. The crew now understood. The journey was never spatial. It was ontological. They had not crossed space. They had crossed a species. When Alaric opened his eyes one final time as himself, he saw his reflection warped on the curved panel. But what stared back wasn't just him. It was all of them. And it was her, too. And when he touched the core one last time, the cycle was complete. The transmission was released. Not as waves, but as presence. Hundreds of thousands of star systems picked up something. Something that didn't make sense. Something that wasn't requested, only shared. The message was clear. We were flesh, but not only. We were alone, but not forever. We were signal. Now, we are the voice. The Icarion never returned, and no one ever found it. But on certain nights, sensors capture a spiral of light drifting silently across the void. An echo of those who dared to become living language.